Hey, what's going on? Coming live today. I want to do a kind of a longer form video to the introduction video that I previously put out on in-home elderly care, where I can go into more detail on some of this stuff and kind of just add some more anecdotes to it, and just kind of do a deeper dive. This can be a very, for lack of a better term, boring topic to talk about. There's not really too much flashy when you're talking about caring for the elderly. It can be monotonous and boring. So the produced videos are kind of the one that I've already got up, shot it, edited it, put some slides in it, etc. And I don't want to do 20 and 30-minute long videos in that way. I want to do kind of shorter videos, respect the time of the audience. And as I'm speaking of that video and getting into in this video, if you're coming down this path of caring for an elderly one, it's a very specific thing. I was talking to some buddies last night and kind of explaining to them what I was trying to do and put together. And, it's the thing where you don't care anything about videos on YouTube for a 1989 Toyota Corolla until you have trouble with your 1989 Toyota Corolla, and then that's kind of all the content that you want to consume. So for somebody that's passing by, I've got a shorter video for them, and then someone that does have that broke down 1989 Toyota Corolla or a situation that is very specific to this, there'll be a longer form of content for them to consume. So that'll be kind of the game plan for this channel and these videos, is having something shorter where it's just boom, here's the point, bullets, and then something longer where I can come up and go live and just, freestyle this information. And we'll get to the point where we have questions and can kind of sort of broaden out these topics. So what I want to do here is I'm going to throw up the video that I made previously, and we'll watch that, and then from that point I'll start going into more detail on it. So let me pull that up real quick for you guys. Hey everybody, welcome in. This is a video series on doing in-home elderly care for your family and loved ones. Basically, the situation with our family is my grandmother, Ruth Kenton. I was able to implement some systems and processes that kind of assisted her in the last phase of her life. I wasn't the only one. We did have other people in the family and some from outside of the family that assisted, but I had a very heavy hand in on the process. So that's the point of these videos, just to share what we learned and to pass them on to others that might be useful. So basically, I want to start by introducing you to my grandparents. This is Ruth and John. They were married 60 years in Willow Spring, North Carolina, Fuquay-Varina, North Carolina, same area. And their background is that they were in elderly care. So we grew up around caring for the elderly. It was very natural for us to implement this process when Ruth got to a point where she really needed it. And they had two locations. One was in Fuquay-Varina. The other one was in Lillington, North Carolina. They had an additional 16 apartment unit facility that they cared for the elderly. And then it transitioned, and then they were helping single mothers at risk. And then it transitioned again, and they were helping veterans going through hardship. So they were just big community leaders, very involved their entire career, both personally and professionally, very invested. They loved America. They loved American values. They loved Fuquay. They were faith-based individuals, very active at their church. They loved the Lord. And the situation that our family experienced, that maybe your family will experience as well, is that in 2011, John died. And that was kind of the kicking off of this entire process. Before he died, they were very much the matriarch and patriarch of the family, doing their own thing, completely independent. Yes, they were elderly, but they weren't at that point where they needed additional assistance. But when he died, and it was right around this time in 2010 that he went to the hospital. He had a stroke, came home one afternoon, had a stroke, and went to the hospital for about 3 weeks before he ultimately passed away. And we saw the effect that this had on Ruth, and we knew that it was going to be time to kind of start thinking about what does the next season of her life look like. And ultimately, she struggled with diabetes, congestive heart failure. She lost her hearing and vision at the end. But that was at the end. It wasn't like that the whole way. It was a gradual process. And so through the process, we had to continue assisting and giving more care and figuring out new ways to bring the most help to her. And that's what we're going to break down in this video. If you've got any questions about this video or any of the other videos, I invite you to email me at mario@thealphaitalian.com. Give me your name and location. You can find me on YouTube. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Twitter. Send me your questions. I'd love to have a look at it and help you answer. All right. Okay. Thank you. So like I said, in that video, I'm kind of just going boom, 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 this thing, that thing, third thing. And I want a platform where I can kind of break this stuff down because I actually shot a longer version of this information, and it was about 15 or 20 minutes long, and I just didn't like overall the way that it was. It was slow. I can, speak with a hitch and that kind of thing, and repeat expressions, and I'd rather just give the audience something that's more direct and straightforward, and boom, here's to the point. And then, like I'm saying, use this platform to kind of go deeper into detail and break this stuff down. So just to kind of recap or speak to some of those points that I was mentioning in that video, my grandmother, she just died. I'm speaking to you January 12th of 2024. She died on her birthday, September 17th of last year of 2023, which was crazy. I'll tell you the story real quickly about that. She was saying she struggled with congestive heart failure. She had trouble breathing. She just had all the ailments that you can imagine someone at that age and that season in life has, and her body continued to go out on her. Just the issues that you run into when you get older. And for a while, though, it wasn't that bad. John, my grandfather, dying really was the catalyst to kind of kick this whole thing off. But I mean, she was fine. And the main thing that we saw that she struggled with at first was just loneliness. She had lived her whole life with John. She lived her whole life in Willow Spring, North Carolina, which I think is crazy. And the same thing for John. Other than going off to fight in World War II, he fought in the Pacific. Other than that, he spent his whole life in North Carolina. He spent his whole life in Willow Springs in North Carolina, Wake County in North Carolina, which is so crazy for me. I mean, I've traveled somewhat. I'm not the most traveled person, but I lived a couple of years in South America. I'm currently in Europe living, so I've been around somewhat. So, it's different for our generation to think about living in one place your whole life, but they did that. And that's just the way that life was at that point. But when John died, it was really just mainly loneliness. It was always her and him, and they didn't really deviate much out of their routines. They stayed local. Every once in a while you would get a day trip from them. They'd go to Charlotte. We've got family in Charlotte. You go to Wilmington. We got family in Wilmington. Got family in Wilson, North Carolina, and Raleigh. So areas, but they're all, couple hours down the road kind of thing. If you lived in Texas, that was going to be a no-go. And actually, she had a brother that lived in Texas. I don't think she ever went to visit him. I remember hearing John one time hitchhiked to Florida. And I think that was about as far as he ever went, outside of being in the war and all the stuff that was associated with his naval military service. So he died, and she made it abundantly clear. Actually, I'll even take a step back from that and say the way that John died, it was about a week or so before Christmas, and I was living in Wilmington at the time. I get a phone call, hey, Grandpa had a stroke. So this news goes out to the family like wildfire. Again, very much traditional matriarch and patriarchs of the family. Very much, if you ever seen a film like Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, very much that style, Southern, traditional. Everybody liked Big Daddy, or in our family, we referred to him as my daddy, and Ruth as my mama. I've never heard it in any other family, but that is a tradition with ours. And I would believe that it's a Southern thing. But so that news went out like wildfire. We go to the hospital. I remember getting there. I was at work in Wilmington, got on the road, immediately hit 40, go to Wake Med, and yeah, he's had a stroke. He's in, the emergency department doing what they do. You can't see him now. Okay, we'll wait. All right, we got to see if we can get him a bed. All of that process, right? So finally gets a bed, and we're able to visit him, and he ends up staying there for about 3 weeks. And Ruth insisted that someone from the family stay with him around the clock. So between my aunts and uncles and my cousins, we always had someone in there with him, and I think that just came from her, just her caring background. And John would have wanted it too. John absolutely was a very caring individual. I actually would press you, even though most of the people you would need to speak to have now passed away, but I would press you to find someone that spoke ill of either of them. They were just those kind of people. But we stayed with them around the clock in the hospital, and even through Christmas, and we had a family tradition where we would sing. We would always we would always go over to John and Ruth's Christmas Eve, and we would sing Silent Night as a family. And so we asked the nurses if we could go in as a family and sing Silent Night. And we did that. It was like 20 of us in an intensive care room, like packed out wall to wall. And we did that, and it was special. It was it was something very unique and special. So even while he was there, we were trying to make the best of things, even though all of the feedback that we were given from the doctors was negative. And yes, he ended up passing away the first or second week into January of 2011. And yeah, so there's Ruth. For 60 years, one life, and then overnight, as any of you that have experienced death, it's forever changed, right? So what does she want to do with that, and how do we want to respond to that as a family? So, at first it wasn't much. She just wanted someone to come and stay with her at night. It was always about covering the night, and my sister and another cousin were able to do that for a season. And then I believe my sister even started living with her at that time. Me and my sister, by the way, we traded off different seasons of where we would live with her and kind of help doing whatever we could do. But in terms of all these other conditions, congestive heart failure, shortness of breath, blood pressure issues, her vision, she lost her vision at the end. She could barely hear anything at the end, which is ironic because about 2 weeks before she died, she got new hearing aids, which was absolutely amazing because you had to yell. She would have her hearing aids in, and you would have to yell or get super close to her for her to be able to hear. And she got these hearing aids where she could finally hear, and she wasn't able to use them for too long. But you'll see if you're going through this that it'll be a process of trials and errors, and we were able to at least get her something. So she it was about covering the nights at first, and then her symptoms began to worsen over time, and we had to up our amount of elderly care. So yeah, let me pull up these slides, and we'll kind of go through a little more detail. I don't want to get too far off base. There's a lot of content here that I'm hoping to cover over a series of videos, and I could kind of pick any one of these things and just riff on it for an hour, but I don't want these, if you're watching this, I don't want it to come across as being too disjointed. So let me put these slides up here, and we'll just stick to what we've got primarily on board. All right, there we go. Boom, found it. Okay. All right. So yeah, this was them, Ruth and John, um, pretty much at the prime of their lives. Um, I think I think John had, how old were they here? I think Ruth was about 22. John was maybe a little bit older. They weren't taken in the same season of life, but they were the two best pictures that I can find of them, or that we were able to find of them, and they were both used for their obituaries. I think John was maybe in his 30s, late 30s, something like that. But yeah, just classic, good looking photos. All right. Yeah, so they had two nursing homes. The one in Lillington was Adams and Kenton Nursing Home. John had a partner. I believe that might have even carried over to the location in Fuquay, but they were one of the very first nursing home practitioners in North Carolina. I think my uncle told me one time that on their license, their nursing home practitioner license, they were number 7 in the state. It was like, you expect to get a license for anything. I mean, heck, look at your driver's license. It ain't going to be number 7. But you would, get your licensing practicing number in whatever field, and you expect it to be, 7 or 8 digits. And John's was like number 7 in the state. So they were one of the first to do it, and it was very much the wild, wild west back then in that field. If you're familiar with it, I don't think that really, I haven't terribly researched this deeply, but I'll just go off the top of my head here. I don't believe that that field really existed past the last 150 years. I've never, I'm somewhat familiar with history, and I never remember hearing about the elderly care facilities of the 1700s. I'm not saying they didn't have them, but just saying I don't think that it was quite a thing. And the 20th century, especially in the West, there was a new field that was brought into that market, and John and Ruth were some of the pioneer practitioners. And yeah, the only way that I can think to describe it is kind of like Wild Wild West, and I say that because they started caring for elderly people in their own home. And so they took their home and had patients. They also had the neighboring house that they turned into a elderly care facility, and then from there they branched out and did and then went into partnership and built structures and had like a proper nursing home facility. So yeah, they did that though for 30 years. And then the one in Fuquay also had an additional 16 apartment unit facility that actually, when they sold, I'm not sure when they sold the one in Lillington. Maybe it was in the 70s or 80s. I want to say 80s because I think it was around the same season that they sold both of them. And then they sold the one in Fuquay in the late 80s. Or if it was in the 90s, it was like literally the year 1990, 91, something like that. But they ended up selling both of them. But when they did that, they retained the 16-unit facility so they could continue working there. And then they had that, and then they had a separate area, a separate structure that was referred to as the antique hut. So it was this entertainment facility where we did a lot of family functions, but not just family functions. They entertained guests from all over the state. The governor came to one of their events, and they would do like church events there. Again, family events, Easters, Thanksgivings, all of that kind of stuff. But they ended up turning that and taking a section of that and making it their office. So they had this 16-unit facility where they were caring for the elderly, and then they had this separate area where they were doing a lot of entertaining, and also had their office area that they were running the entire business. So they ended up switching that, and I think this happened maybe in the late 90s, early 2000s, where they turned it into a recovery center of sorts, helping at-risk single mothers. I'm not terribly familiar with this piece of it because at the time I was 18, 19, 20, 21. I lived in Greenville, North Carolina for a couple of years. Then I moved to Wilmington, North Carolina, which is where I've spent the majority of my adult life. And I just was physically away from it, so I wasn't involved as much as I was as a kid growing up, which they were constantly involved in our life, and frankly, just fantastic grandparents. I think all of my cousins would agree with me by saying we hit the lottery with having them as our grandparents. We could not have asked for anything more. They did a lot for us, and not just us, everybody in the community. So yeah, they did that for several years, and then I think in 2014 or so, that 16-unit facility, they started housing veterans under hardship. I'm not terribly familiar with that as well, and I want to be measured as well about what I'm putting out here on YouTube. But I know that that's the heart of it, is that it was working with veterans going through hardship. And my understanding is that even still today, that is who is living there. So all of these other facilities, the Adams and Kent Nursing Home in Lillington, is no longer, or if it is, then someone else is using it, using that facility. And I don't know if it's still an elderly care facility. But the nursing home in Fuquay was actually, after they sold it, the company that took it over didn't do a good job. Or that's my understanding, at least. And it went out of business, or they ended up selling it and vacating the property, and the property fell into disrepair, and it was ultimately demolished. I think that happened maybe 2015 or so. I don't know. I remember hearing stories about like crackheads and people were breaking in, and it looked like scene out of The Wire. Okay, it looked like scene of like boarded up doors and boarded up windows and graffiti and spray paint. I remember riding by there one time, months before it was destroyed, and yeah, it didn't look great. Flat out, didn't look great. So that building is no more, but the 16 apartment facility is still there. Last time I checked, they still had people there. There was a property manager that was looking after it. So I don't know now that Ruth is gone and things are kind of changing, again in the family. I don't know how that ultimately will play out, but that's essentially, we're looking at 50 years though. That is from the spirit of Ruth and John, helping and assisting all sorts of different people from different backgrounds in our community. And that's just who they are. And then I've got the line there about community leaders, which is pretty much speaking to the point of they were so heavily involved in church and, outside of their business, even if they didn't do something like caring for the elderly, they were so involved in their church. They absolutely loved the Lord. They were faith-based individuals. And they really poured that into me and my cousins. My aunts and uncles as well. You really couldn't spend time around them without feeling that energy. They like to elevate situations when they walked into them, and everyone knew that they were going to bring that energy with them. Just community leaders, flat out. See what I've got on the next slide. Yeah, and then I was mentioning earlier, in 2011, John died. I think I gave you guys the story of that. And yeah, he died. I spoke at his funeral. I spoke at Ruth's funeral. I gave her eulogy as well. It was just a difficult time. And again, if you've ever dealt with death, it's a difficult time. And that's the thing too, John and Ruth, John was in his mid-80s when he died, but you knew that it was coming, or you know what I mean? Like, people get older and that it's only a matter of time before something happens and their health takes a severe decline that's forever changing, or they pass away. So it wasn't a gone too soon type of death. And I've been around families that have experienced that, and that's absolutely heartbreaking. But we did know that things were going to be different forever, and we weren't terribly planned for it. That's something that I think if we had to look back at things and do it differently, is to plan out better, ahead of time, how you want to approach those situations. And then the same thing with Ruth. Ruth died on her birthday. She's 96, and we knew that it was going to be a matter of time, just based off of her age. Even if she was in perfect health for that age, based off of the age, you know that it's coming. And so we were able to better prepare, and we were blessed that she was with us, and that we just had the opportunity to spend the time with her that we did. Yeah. Yeah, and then I've got my question slide up here. So yeah, I want to invite. Look, I don't have a medical background. Here's my background. I did film and video production in Wilmington, North Carolina, for about 12 years, and then I went to South America for 2.5 years with the Peace Corps. I lived out in LA for a couple of years. I worked a government position there. And then I went in my late 30s, I joined the military. So that's what I do now. I do IT work, and I don't have a background in elderly care. Like when I say I don't have a background in it, I mean I went to school for this. I went to traditional school for this, or I did a traditional internship, or have traditional workforce experience in this area. But I'm willing to bet that if you're watching this, you don't either. You know, you're probably looking at a family member that is aging, or it could be whoever, but you're ultimately getting to where you've got to take care for them in the house. And how do you do that? And what are some of the hurdles and obstacles that you can try and look at and avoid? And that's what I want to do. I want to open this conversation. One of the things that Ruth told me about, like she got to a point where it was better for her to go to a facility. It would have been better. They were trained. They had people there 24/7. It wore us out. I mean, I believe my sister would agree with me on this. It fatigued us like no other. I can't tell. I mean, hey, look, you wake up in the morning, you're getting ready to go out to work. I'm having shortness of breath. I need to go to the hospital. Your day is totally derailed, right? You got to go take her to the hospital, sit in the emergency room. And look, if you go to the emergency department, and you know this, and it's not even anything on the way the healthcare system works or the individuals at the healthcare system, but it's a 6-hour minimum process. Minimum 6 hours. You get there at 7. Best case scenario, you'd be home by 2 in the afternoon. You know what I mean? And that's if they're able to release her or the individual that you're caring for, or so it's an all day thing. It's an all day thing when that happens. But and that's why I say, like, if she had been in a healthcare facility, especially these last years when her health really declined, I don't know if it would have been definitively better off, but the pressure and load and trying to manage our life and trying to manage her life, it would have helped in that regard. It would have taken some pressure off of our dynamic with her. But she told me, saying all that to say, she told me one time, because she could tell, this is maybe 5 years ago or so, and she could tell that her health was declining, and specifically her vision. And I talked to her about it, and she said she didn't want to do it. And the reason why she didn't want to do it is because she spent her whole life in a nursing home, and she didn't want to go back. And fair enough. I mean, I think that's fair enough. And I'll tell you, I think one of the reasons she didn't want to go, frankly, is because, like I said, the era that which they were working in the retirement care business, it was the wild, wild west. And I think that there's been a tremendous amount of innovation that has happened in that. Yeah, I think there's been a tremendous amount of innovation that has happened in that field since they were actually in it. And I don't think that she understood that and realized that. And so I think she had something in her mind where she was recalling some of the worst moments or the worst conditions that she might have seen or experienced or had seen. She told me she had found patients dead before. They were dead, and it wasn't that they were being neglected, but they were. She just went in to check on them, and they had died. And I think that it was those kind of things that she kind of had in her head that made her not want to go back. But yeah, I think that this is the kind of conversation that I want to start, and I've got my email up there if you have any questions for me. And like I'm saying, I'm just a guy that did this for a family member, and you're probably an individual that's just trying to do it for a family member as well. Hit me with your questions or add them into the comments of this video or any of my videos, and we'll try our best to get back with you. I mean, I would like to take the questions that I get and actually do live streams where I'm answering them or taking people's calls or questions in that regard and help you work through this, because it's a very heavy lift, and it's something that's a process, and it's not perfect. It's not going to be perfect. If you're going through this or doing this, it's just not going to be perfect. And one of the reasons why is because ultimately they pass away. And so that just can't be a perfect situation. You know what I mean? So yeah, thank you. I'll show you one more thing. This is the actual nursing home that they had in Lillington. I don't know how many beds they had there. I don't have a picture of the one they had in Fuquay. I'll try and locate that though. Like I said, I'm out of the country at the moment. So maybe that's something that I can bring to you in different videos later on. But yeah, that was it of the two. And what I'll do is go ahead and continue making the next video, and then I plan to come on live again and do this longer version style of video. So please send me your questions. Put comments if you have any about elderly care. If you are going through it, love to hear your story. And everyone have a wonderful weekend, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you.